Because when you are a parent, you also think, and in my case, I felt like I was not a good mom. I'm damaged goods. I'm somebody who, how can I continue to teach my children, being that I'm not stable, at least at that time I feel. So that was to me, it was a little hard to overcome that, because you are parents, you think you do your best, but you have that fear that you're not going to teach them everything that they need to know to save themselves from the situation that I was in. Okay, for me, I think that I become more protected of my children. Just, I have two boys. One is a teenager, and one is 8 years old. And just, it just, my mind, it's like I feel like I'm almost overly protected them, almost like a mama bear, from anywhere that they go. I know they are boys, but I just get that almost like anxiety attack anytime that someone approach them, or just like, when we go places and we go to the theme park, and someone will approach them just to ask question, or just to say something, just to say hello. I get anxious for no reason. So since my abuse has been over a year now, and so since then I feel like I need to get out of that, because I don't want my children to feel like what's going on, because they don't know the whole entire detail what happened to me. So that's still a work in progress for me to kind of, showing my less anxious when I'm in front of them.
So for me, because my mother and my sister are also survivors, and when I did have kids, I actually had a lot of suppressed memories, so it didn't come up until my kids were a little bit older. But I had always been aware of, you know, being overprotective and having a lot of anxiety and fear initially when my oldest, who's now 9 at the time, was around 4 and 5 years old. I started realizing that I hadn't taught him anything, and so it made me very anxious to leave him with anyone, or if there was a babysitter that came over. Like, it was just, there was constant anxiety and constant fear of, not trusting people, not trusting even family at times, and like feeling guilty about that too. Um, so it impacted me in coming to terms actually with what I had always feared, and figuring out how to proceed so that I didn't live my life, feeling anxious, and not allowing my kids to have a lot of the freedoms that I also didn't have, because my mother's also a survivor and how she raised me. So it impacted me in the way that I decided to move forward as I continue to have kids, because I have three now and they're still young, and they, definitely still need me to be an advocate. So I had to learn how to develop my own boundaries so that I could uphold them on their behalf. So there were a lot of things that were brand new. I mean, parenting in general, when you first have kids, is all of it is brand new, but um, wanting to do something about it and not just live in fear the way that I ended up realizing my mom had lived in fear raising us, which ultimately um, didn't completely protect us. And so figuring out how to, be able to do that in a way that was empowered and not coming from a place of fear. So that really actually changed my life in very big ways. So it was a huge impact.
I think my abuse has affected the way I parent in many, many ways. Firstly, as far as I've ever known myself, I've never been interested in being a mother. I just didn't feel that that was my jam. I never really acknowledged the reason behind it, but I just knew me and kids, yeah, it's cool if it's your child, but I don't need any. So when my husband and I found out I was pregnant about 4 years ago, that was just terrible. That was like the end of the world for me. It was a lot of prenatal depression. It was me thinking, you know what? I think I might have to have an abortion because I just really don't want to have a child. And I knew from the moment that I was pregnant that I was having a little girl. I knew that the little girl was going to look like me. It was just all these things coming back. And I was questioning everything because inside I felt like I had dealt with a lot of the abuse. I felt like, I went to counseling, I went to therapy, but I just felt like this is not a good idea to be pregnant because this is just not going to end well. Like I don't know what I'm doing, but I know that I can't have this child. I did end up having our first daughter, and now we have a second daughter. And I just feel like I've been moving to a more positive place in my parenting, and as a survivor, I do feel sometimes overly protective, very observant, but I'm always trying to reframe what I'm doing and how I'm behaving as a mother in a more positive light. And I do realize that when we had our first daughter in 2017, one of the things that I didn't have a name for was to teach her consent, to teach her that she's her own self, she's in charge of her body, who has access, who doesn't, what happens to it, and her voice needs to be heard no matter who it is, and that I'm always going to be there, I'm always advocating for her. So even as an infant, I was practicing consent by saying, okay, mommy's going to change your diaper. I know the wipe might be a little cold. All right, so I'm doing this. Okay, I'm going to take your pants off. Okay, I got these socks. Like I didn't even know that that was what I was doing. But looking back, I'm so happy that that's something that I started. And it's something that I'm continuing as a mother, just, being there. Because we always have, sometimes it's in the background, sometimes in the foreground of our mind, like this is what happened to me. And what's going to happen with my children, they're going to be the first generation where they're going to be fine. They're going to be protected, loved, cared for, advocated for, and that's just my mission. So yeah.
For me, parenting after all of the abuse, that first being pregnant was amazing. It was, if I could bottle it up, sell it how I felt, I would be a millionaire. But the second that he was out of me and I saw him, those first 2.5, 3, 4 years, I was like, it was completely different. I realized that um, everything that happened to me could happen to him. And I was terrified. I couldn't protect him anymore because he was outside of me. Um, you know, just it terrified me. Um, and I didn't know that there was a word for it. I didn't know um, postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression. I didn't know that that's what it was. I didn't understand that all the abuse had something to do with it. Like Zinette said, I didn't realize, here's the wet wipe. I'm changing your diaper. I'm sorry it's cold. Like I didn't realize all of that. But even now, I got him a book. He's 5, but I feel he needs to know. These these are what we call our private parts. It's called a penis. Like here are the names. So if I hear if I hear a word that we don't use, I'm gonna understand, and I'm sure I will know where it came from. I don't trust even family members to watch him. Um, my husband is away for work right now, and he's sick. Um, but I'm watching him. So if I have to skedaddle for a second, like that's just what it's going to be because I don't trust anybody to watch him. I'm sure there are people who could watch him, but I just don't trust that because that's what happened to me. Um, but like Zinette said, and the other women here, it is my mission, along with my husband's mission, that Rigel will be fine. He will know consent. One of the things that my family and my husband's family probably don't like very much, if Rigel doesn't want to hug somebody, he doesn't have to hug him. If he doesn't want to have to give a high five, he doesn't have to give a high five. If he doesn't want to say bye, he doesn't have to say bye. And if they get upset about it, they are an adult. They can get over it. So it's a lot of teaching him boundaries and understanding that his body is his body. He has a right to feelings, and a lot of just trying new things to protect him, giving him tools to protect himself.
Okay, well, I parent in that I am more paranoid. I have a lot of anxiety over things that haven't happened. I play scenarios in my head with different people that could happen. So I'm over anxious. I overpack. I overwatch. I'm just super vigilant. So I'm sure that had something to do with it.
After abuse happened, I think this world is the most scariest place of all time. Just like other abuse victim, where you start self-blame yourself. You think that you are not good enough. You're not scream. You're not doing all that to help yourself out from the situation. Now because when you are a parent, you also think, and in my case, I felt like I was not a good mom. I'm damaged goods. I'm somebody who, how can I continue to teach my children, being that I'm not stable, at least at that time I feel. So that was to me, it was a little hard to overcome that, because you are parents, you think you do your best, but you have that fear that you're not going to teach them everything that they need to know to save themselves from the situation that I was in. So yeah, that my biggest fear is the world just look completely different to me, and I want to do everything in my power to turn that, to put the bright color back to the world that my kids seeing and what I'm seeing, so that then we can move on truly.
So for me, because I'm a consent educator and abuse prevention specialist, I do a lot of research. I spend a lot of time researching what it is that I should be looking for. And particularly, I'm researching what motivates abusers and what are their tactics and strategies. And so I feel a lot more empowered because I have that information, but at the same time, there's a part of me that's always wondering, like, if I'm missing something, or if there's something that I should be, something else that I should be teaching my children about, even though I have all the tools and all the information. But I think that that's just inherent because I'm a survivor, that I'm always, my mom, for example, was always warning us of the outside world, but failed to look at, in her own home. And so there's always this fear of, like, am I going to miss something like she did, and so I'm always, I think that I have learned how to balance it, and there's tools that I use to help me balance that. But there's always that little grain of doubt in my mind that's like, what else should I be teaching my kids, or what else should I be looking out for? And I'm already pretty hyper vigilant as it is, but there's a lot less trust that I have for the world because of all the things that I know. But I think that ultimately it comes down to making sure I'm continuously having open conversations with my children that are developmentally appropriate, right? That they continue to evolve as my children grow. And so, yeah, that's sort of the ongoing journey for me, is balancing that fear and empowerment at the same time.
I have a couple of fears. And let me start from the beginning. When I found out that I was pregnant, or knocked up. My mom always used to tell me, girl, you're not knocked up. I'm like, yes, I am. That's how it feels. My first fear was not loving her because I didn't want to have her. I wasn't even considering adoption. I just didn't want the whole thing to even occur. So when she came, when I delivered her and I didn't want to hold her, it was just this whole thing. So being close to people, touch, that can be very difficult for us as survivor parents. And I was just fearful that I wouldn't get it right because I just didn't want to be around her. But as the months went on and I was able to develop a connection and later on it blossomed into love, I was like, oh my goodness, I can do this. And it helped alleviate some of my fears. But then as time goes on, there's always ones that come up. And then it's like, well, when she was younger, okay, she's a baby. So who's really going to abuse a baby? But then as she gets older and she gets to a certain age and it's like, oh, so it was, my fears were, how will I be able to love her? How will I prevent her from being abused? And how will I make sure I show up for her in everything? Because she has to know from the little things that I'll show up for her so that if anything larger or more, you know, something larger seems to happen, that she'll know that I'm her person. So those are my number 3 fears.
My fear for parenting after abuse is that I will I'm afraid that I will my overprotection will have him miss out of something in life that's it. It's just, I'm afraid that I'll overprotect him and have him miss out on something. And I don't want that.
My greatest fear after parenting didn't come right away. I was still in denial when I had my first daughter. Well, not really denial. Well, yeah, it was denial. And I was actually hospitalized after she was maybe 6 months old. And that's when my road to recovery and admitting that I had a problem started. And the therapist I went to, she said that the body keeps score. So maybe at her age, maybe there was some abuse. I don't know at 6 months old, but I do know at 6 and 7, there was definitely abuse. But so affecting me, my biggest fear, looking back on the way my mother parented me, which was, she was super vigilant about me being too sexual too early, but always with boys. And like someone else said, outside of the home. And at the time she was warning me and she gave she acted like she was there and she was open, but she was still very judgmental, very angry, very scared that something would happen to me. I come to her anyway, even though she would tell me that she was available. So now that I'm an adult and I have my own child, it's like, well, geez, how can I get this right? Because technically she did everything right and I still didn't go to her after the abuse. And it's like, you can't really win, because what if she's not abused by a family member and I keep bringing in outside babysitters and they do it? It's like, it's just a lot of paranoia. And I also fear that I'm thinking about it. Like I'm always on guard. Like I wish I would think about something else, like hoping she doesn't become a pothead or something. But that's not my fear. My fear is hoping she doesn't get abused. And even with my husband, like when he touches her a certain way, I'm like, don't do that. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, that looks a little sexual. That's too much. It's just like all day in my head. It's insane. So that, and my other fear is that I may be an abuser. What makes someone abuse? And I also went down that rabbit hole, especially before I wrote my book. And I did add what I found out about people who abuse in the book. But I'm just like, a lot of abusers turn into abusers, and a lot who are abused don't. So I try to figure out what's the difference there, because I don't want to turn into one, because I don't know what makes one. So it's just a lot of hypervigilance, a lot of anxiety, sure that I do it right. So I just fear that I don't mess it up or manifest it, or even though I try, it still happens in some other way.
Well, the abuse happened years after I gave birth to my children, but I experienced something, I would say similar, because I do have to go to get the well woman exam. So that means my doctor have to, you know, touch me where I feel uncomfortable. It's gonna trigger, it's gonna remind me of the pain. I feel so powerless because I can't move. You know, even though doctor does a good job where she would tell me, okay, I'm about to do this, I'm gonna do this next. So that helped ease my mind, but still not completely ease my mind to feel 100% comfortable. So I can only imagine, you know, if I'm just thinking, if I were someone who going to be a mother and giving birth, what does that look like? I have a feeling it's gonna be 100 things on my list that I run through my head. How am I gonna get through this? You might have to, like, you know, put me to sleep to go through this whole experience, because I may not want to just know or feel someone touch me in a certain area that I would probably, you know, jump off the bed and run. I probably couldn't, but you know, it just that thing definitely came to my mind.
For me, it was wanting to make sure that I had all female, like a complete female medical team. I hadn't, because I had repressed memories, I hadn't come to terms with my own child sexual abuse when I was pregnant, but I did experience date rape when I was older. So I still had a lot of like that physical, you know, like Shanique said, like the body keeps score. And so for me, it was like making sure that everyone who was on my medical team was someone who I was completely comfortable with. And even then, when I had to do like medical exams, you know, that there was always a sense of like trepidation. I was always a little bit uneasy, and fortunately, you know, everyone was great, and I didn't have any issues, you know, during any of the births. But it was definitely something that I was conscious of in terms of like who was on the medical team, and making sure that I was able to vocalize anything, you know, feeling empowered to be able to like speak up for myself if there was something that I was uncomfortable with. And my partner, fortunately, was really supportive with that too, and helped advocate for me if I needed it, if I couldn't do it myself in that moment. So I was fortunate that I didn't have this negative experiences I know a lot of other mothers do have. But yeah, so that, you know, fortunately, it wasn't a terrible experience for the pregnancy, for the births.
Looking back now on my two experiences with both my daughters, I'm really surprised that I had a second child, because okay, so we already know that when I was pregnant the first time I was not very happy, but I did end up going through with everything. I had a birth plan because I'm like, I know nothing. I need to know things. So I decided that the best approach would be something more calming and natural, you know, not too many interventions. Let's do as much as we can as the body would do. But the plan was to do it, to give birth at a hospital. So I had a team of doctors. My practice, unfortunately, you cannot pick who exactly you're going to be having. But for me, it didn't matter too much, because with my abuse, I was abused by both male and female. So I had my birth plan. I had my expectations. I had one of the lead doctors she laughed at me, and she said, yeah, you have a birth plan, but trust me, none of that's going to happen, honey. And, you know, it was very dismissive. I didn't like the approach at all. When it came to the examinations, I knew I was going to have issues with the pregnancy and with everything, but I was not aware that I was going to be triggered so much. And the pregnancy alone, I just felt out of control. I was not in control of my body, and it just made me feel like parenting was more threatening, like it really wasn't something I wanted to go through with. I remember with my first pregnancy, I was in my second trimester, and I had to do one of those dreaded cervical examinations. And I was instantly triggered. I was screaming. It was painful. And it was the exact pain that I had went through with one of my abusers. Then when I went home, I spent 3 days in my bed. I was curled up in a fetal position and I spoke to my husband. Well, on the second day, I think I told him what was the issue. It was just so terrible and so triggering that I didn't even have the words to express what I was going through. And so with our first daughter, the birth plan, it didn't really go as planned, but that's okay. That's how it is sometimes. Now with my second daughter, I was more empowered because I knew some things, right? I was thinking, how can I make this better for myself? How can this be a journey that I'll really enjoy? Because I always hear women talk about how amazing and fabulous pregnancy is. And I'm like, what? Where? Anyway, so what I did, and when I told my therapist about this, she was like, oh, I need to write this down. I asked for them to put on my medical file that I was a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. So on my first appointment, I had the nurse and the doctor talk through things with me. And, would you be comfortable with this? Oh, we could do this. So they were making provisions for me. So with our second doctor, I didn't have to go through all of the same examinations. There was a lot of care that was taken with me instead of the first time. Oh, girl, why are you screaming? What? Excuse me? So it was just totally different. My birthing team was also different. They really took care of me. And unfortunately, I gave birth during a pandemic. So my mother wasn't with me for the second birth. But with the first one, I needed my mother there because I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it without her. With our first child, I wasn't able to hold her because I didn't want to. And with the second child, because I felt more empowered, because there were medical professionals who were really trying to meet me where I was in my healing journey, I was able to hold her. I was able to do all these things. And I just want to tell the survivor parents out there that we're in charge of ourselves, even in the medical field, even if we don't feel like we're being heard. And you can tell them things, and it is their responsibility to be able to meet you where you are, to be able to make provisions for you and what you might need. Even if you're not sure what you need, just to tell them, this is how I'm feeling. I'm feeling uncomfortable. Is there something else we could do? Because even when I was in labor, my doctor came and told me, we don't need to check you again. With the first pregnancy, they were checking me for different things and it was just too much. So yeah, that's my long-winded answer.
For me, I did have a birth planned. During the birth or during the pregnancy, I practiced hypnobirthing. I did prenatal yoga 3 times a week. I meditated. I did all of this because I knew, with all the trauma that I endured before, I didn't want to go through regular therapy because just knowing how I have reacted to normal therapy before, I didn't want that energy in my baby's womb at the time. I was like, this is all about my baby. I want it all good, clean energy. Let's make it clear, clean, all of that. Also, my husband was on deployment at the time. We found out we were 6 weeks pregnant, 2 weeks before he had to leave. So perfect timing. But other than that, I guess that was another reason why I was just like, all right, I got to do this. I have to, I am in control. I need to make sure that everything is the way I want it, and so since he was gone, I had my mom and my best friend in the room with me. And I told both of them and the medical team, which I asked for all women. My doctor was out for some reason, but I did say, I want all women. Other than that, I was fine. But for whatever reason, both families, who my husband and I have large families, both families were walking in and out the whole time, male and female. It got to the point where I was just like, why is everybody in and out? I felt very, very disrespected, very vulnerable. It got to the point where I was like, if you're going to just walk in and out of this part where you see I'm like in the middle of labor pains and you're just going to sit there. I can't hold this back. So I was just like, all right, I just let them see whatever it is that nature intended for them to see since they needed to be there. But I felt very disrespected, and it's still like, it makes me upset. It makes me mad. It hurts my feelings, all of that. So that was the only thing that really triggered, it still triggers me. Like, why would they need to be there? Why couldn't my mom stick up for me again? You know, my best friend did her best to stick up for me, but you know, my best friend compared to my whole family, what does she have? You know, so that's the only thing that happened. So
my birthing plan wasn't affected by my sexual abuse. It was affected more by my emotional abuse with my mother, my connection there. With the first child, as I said, I wasn't even really aware of how the abuse was affecting me. A child where I knew, but even so, birthing was the best part of my entire life. Like, I loved pregnancy. I loved birthing. I'm considering being a surrogate for women. Like, I really, really love pregnancy. And I did do the hypnobirthing. I had both my children at home in the water, very limited people. I wish my mother wasn't there the first time. But the only reason I wish she wasn't there was because of how scared she was. And as you all know, with the fear and birthing, that is what causes the labor pains. And all that fear, it does not help the situation. So I know she was trying her best, and I know she meant well, but she didn't read the books I recommended to her. So she wasn't aware that women could have natural births. We can have big babies. We can do it our first time. And really believe that. There's a lot of head-to-head there. And as far as the sex of my team, I didn't care. I did gravitate towards a woman, even though I was abused by women, because I feel like women understand birthing because we have kids. So I didn't let that affect my plan. I avoided the hospital like the plague, having to go one time and ended up being a male, and he was anti-natural birth, anti-birthing out of the hospital. He kept me there for like an hour telling me how stupid I am, basically, to try and have a natural birth for my first child, and how skinny I am, I can't do it. He's asking me, have you ever seen a woman die giving birth? And I'm like, oh, what? And then my mother is behind him going, So as long as I stuck to my birthing plan, which was natural everything, as little intervention as possible, no checks really, unless they absolutely needed it. I didn't do the eyes, the vitamin K after birth. I kept my babies under the water until it felt like time for them to come up so they weren't traumatized. Actually, you know what? Now that I just said that, it did affect the way I birthed my children. Less traumatized as possible. It's like mother instincts kicked in. So I changed my answer. Yes, it does. I was gung-ho on everything being super zen and them just being number one priority. I guess because I didn't feel like number one. So I went above and beyond to make sure they had the most seamless entry into this world possible. And yeah, it went very well. Oh, but I would rather listen to your video with my second child. I did try and rush the process with the midwife's brew, and it did work. I had my son 24 hours after taking it. And even though I was full term, he wasn't ready to come. And it ended up keeping a little piece of placenta stuck in my wall after he came out, and I was still in labor because my body thought that I still had a piece that was in there. So I didn't get to bond with him as much. Past the first hour, my father-in-law was holding him, my husband was holding him, and I was in pain, laboring for many hours after he already left, just because I wanted to rush the process. So yeah, don't do that. But yeah, it technically did affect my birthing plan.
This is a really good question because it did happen to me so many times, but none of my children aware that that's or see my reaction. So my abuse happened outdoor, you know, picnic table, camping, mountain, trees. So, you know, and my kids love being outdoor. They love get the bicycle and we'll go ride a bike, and they say, well, let's go to this park, you know, because it's so close to our home. But that's where I was abused. So I was just like, okay, let me get an inhaler because I can't breathe now. But they don't notice any different because I already have asthma issue. But it's not for asthma. I know exactly what happened to me at that time. So it just keep happening. But it just, you know, I eventually, when I work with my therapist, I did have to share that. And that is one of the things that I share. I'm like, look, you know, what can I do to help myself from not feeling panic or not looking like something terrible happening in my head when my children have no clue what's going on. So it is a long process. And I think, you know, I think as the time go, I'm gonna say it's less trigger to me now. Like I'm able to go to the mountain. I can go where the tree, feel the cool breeze. But the only place I can't is the actual site. So I just tell my children, you know, it's kind of like white lie sometimes, like, oh, they closed because COVID. But my teenager doesn't buy that. But you know, still a work in progress.
For me, it was actually when my kids were a little bit younger and they were still having bath time together. And then they would get out and, you know, there was obviously like getting ready for bed and getting dressed. And there was like sort of child curiosity play that, you know, when they're naked and playing with each other. And it was like a trigger for me because I know that sibling abuse is possible, or, you know, like peer on peer abuse. And so it was just this like moment of feeling like I have to put a stop to that. And I can't let them, you know, play that way because it could lead to like a million things. And no, like I actually had to schedule a call with a friend of mine who's a sex educator. And because in the moment, my, you know, gut instinct was to like put a stop to it. And so I was like, you know, being the consent educator, it's like, okay, you know that you're not supposed to be playing that way. And that's, you know, without trying to create shame and, you know, making sure that they didn't feel like what they were doing was wrong necessarily, but also to remind them about boundaries and remind them about, you know, safe touch and private parts and all that kind of stuff that I teach. But at the same time, like having this guttural reaction that I didn't want like that negative energy put on them. So when I said that, because, you know, and I've said it in the past, but having that moment where I, you know, they were like still kind of playing around more jokingly than anything, like it was completely innocent, but it was just this moment for me of like in my gut, it like hit me. And just taking a breath, like reminding myself to take a breath before I speak. So I was able to relay it calmly, but my son was like, but we are consenting, and like, why isn't that okay if we're consenting? And like, I didn't have an answer in that very moment. So I was like, well, I'm going to get back to you and let you know the answer. So I was able to speak to my friend again, she's a sex educator. And I was like, how do I explain this? And, you know, her answer was basically like, you know, children can't really consent to touching in those private areas. And so it was a good like lesson for me to be able to speak to them about it after and, you know, come back and say, you know, it's perfectly okay for you to self-explore your body and, you know, be able to to let them know that there's nothing shameful about that, but that, boundaries are important, and that kind of, play is not okay, especially because I don't want them to ever think that it's okay as they get older, and then, out of just sheer curiosity, be doing that with other kids. And then, so it's just like the the way that your mind kind of starts picturing things like, years before before it's even a possibility, and wanting to like my internal reaction was like to yell, "Hey, stop, like what are you guys doing?" And I had to take a breath and like calm down. Even like talking about it, I can still feel the inner like anxiety, just because of what I know from other people that have had those experiences. And so it was just, whenever that kind of thing happens, I have to remind myself to just pause, take a breath. Like if I need to step outside and, out of the room and take some breaths so I can come back and deal with the situation calmly, that's something that I've learned to do over time. And when I went back to share that with them, about, why it's important that they continue to, even within, themselves being siblings, they were totally fine. Like it was just like normal. Oh, okay, that's cool. And in my mind, it was just this like whole thing that I had to be really official about it, and all the things. But a lot of times we just make a mountain out of nothing, which, I completely get how it was my response, and probably a lot of other parents feel that way. But if we take a breath and then just figure out what's the right answer, and then, share it with them, it's not as big of an issue, and is a learning opportunity. So I've had many of those kinds of situations, but what I've learned has helped the most is just to step away if I need to calm down and self-regulate, and then come back and deal with it more calmly.
So I have a 5-month-old daughter, and unfortunately, I was on bed rest for 5 months with her because I went into preterm labor. And something that I realized that I didn't think would happen, because, like I said, I did a lot of work in between these children. I really felt triggered when I was in the bed in pain, like excruciating pain, and I just felt out of control. I was only allowed to get out of bed for 20 minutes max a day. I wasn't able to stretch. I wasn't able to climb stairs. I wasn't able to drive. There are all these restrictions on what I could do with my body. And it was just so overwhelming. And I was just like, oh my goodness, am I being triggered again? So I had about 2 weeks of where I was like, oh my goodness, I'm losing it. But thankfully, I was able to get through that with the help of my therapist and my husband. Now, when we're talking with my 3-year-old now, I am dealing with a lot of triggers with her. Usually they're daily. And there could be things like potty training. She's already fully potty trained, but when we were potty training, there are times when I know she needs to use the bathroom. She's telling me, no, she doesn't need to go. But I am not cleaning up any more pee. Okay. I am just not going to be cleaning it anymore. So you're going to sit on this potty, and you are going to pull down your pants, pull down your underwear, and you're going to sit, and you're going to just relax and empty out your bladder. And there's screaming and there's flailing, and I'm being firm with her and trying to follow through with what's going on. And in my head, I'm like, oh my God, I'm literally forcing her to do something that she doesn't want to do with her own body. And it deals with her private parts, and it's just, overwhelming. So there are many times I had to just let my husband just take the lead, and I just couldn't participate. And then when I thought that was all over, we were done with it, then we were night training. So in the middle of the night, we got to go. So it's dark again, you got to, it was just too much. And I spoke with my therapist about it, and she was like, well, let's just have something that we could say. So with the potty training, there's a mantra I would audibly say. I was calming myself down and calming her down, although usually she was fine at night. Just, we're about to use the potty. It's right here. You're safe. Mommy's here, just talking through things. And it was very, very helpful. And also getting my husband to do it a lot, that was helpful too. So with the tantrums and screaming, I do not like crying at all. I never have. I don't like to cry. I don't like to hear anybody crying. And the tantrums with this toddlerhood is like too much, because a lot of the times it sounds like something else. It sounds like she's screaming out that something is happening to her. She sounds like she's screaming like I was screaming when I was younger. And it can just be so triggering. Another thing for me are bunk beds. My husband wants to get her a bunk bed, and I'm saying, no, I don't want to get a bunk bed. There's really nothing wrong with bunk beds. bunk beds are cool. You could climb up, you could jump down. But for me, I was molested on bunk beds, you know, incest and bunk beds and all of that. It's just not good for me. Now, with my older daughter, my younger daughter playing together, I'm also very watchful. I've been able to kind of relax over the last couple months, but just looking at the interactions. Is it okay? Is it safe? Is that too much? Oh my goodness, give her space. Why are you on your sister? Like, relax. But I'm just trying to be more loving in my approach and not be so anxious because children feel that. We don't want to be, well, I don't want to be always giving off this nervous energy, you know, just more calm because they feed off of everything we do. Now, about a month ago, being 3 years old, being curious, knowing the different body parts, she touched my vagina. Mommy, that's your vagina. After, like, as she was doing it, and I lost it. I'm gonna be honest with you, I absolutely lost it. It was me yelling, me, oh my God, don't you ever, like, it was just going in. And while I'm doing it, I'm thinking, oh my God, this is not how I should be handling this at all. It wasn't the first time that she had been curious and anything. And I've always been able to calmly gather myself, but I didn't that time. And after a few moments and it was done, I put myself in the bathroom. I called my husband. I told him what happened. And then I was able to go back to my 3 year old, explain to her what I did and why that wasn't good, explain to her that I understand that she's curious, but that's a place that she cannot touch. And just reiterate the things that I've told her about her own body and who's allowed to touch it and how it also goes along with mommy's body too. You know, that's not something that you could do. So for me, what's been helpful with the triggering with motherhood is my audible mantras that I say to myself and in the presence of my children, morning and when they're going to bed, and also grounding outside barefoot while I'm either holding one's hand or holding, you know, the baby.
I'm going through a similar thing with the triggers. My son is 5 years old, and throughout this whole time, we've been pretty like lenient with our bodies. Like we're not like shameful of our bodies or anything like that. And but lately he's been very interested in my breasts and like very touchy and grabby. And at this point, at this point, it's like it's not like he's a little man, you know, like it's not little baby hands anymore, and it's just different. And I'm like, okay, so this is what I was talking about.
I'm in kindergarten.
Okay, buddy, I need you to.
And Drew, he's from my school, and he's the oldest. He's 6, and there's no 6-1s.
Okay, go back in there. Okay.
And there's 3-year-olds, but they're supposed to be in puppy.
But yeah, I'm trying to teach him to understand that, you know, there's boundaries. Just like, you know, he has control who touches him. You know, like I have control about who touches me. And even if it is him, if he touches me in a way that makes me uncomfortable, he should stop, you know, because he loves me and he wouldn't want to make me feel uncomfortable. He shouldn't touch people in a way that makes them feel uncomfortable. So we're just trying to teach them we're trying to teach him about boundaries right now. And then another one is the aggressive hitting, and everything is a gun right now because he's 5. You know, it's all normal. It's all innocent 5-year-old stuff. But it's just, there's a time and a place, you know, and pointing pizza crust at mommy, even though it's cute and fun for him, is not cute and fun for me. And I don't like it. So you can play pizza crust gun wars with your kiddos next door, not with mommy, not at the dinner table. So I just remind him that each time. And then, you know, there's my parents were very, they were not calm. If I did something, if I breathed the wrong way, they were screaming at me. So my way of parenting is very, okay, very calm. I give him chances after chance after chance. And then, if it gets to that point where I'm just like, all right, this isn't cool, I just get up and leave. And I'm like, all right, Dad, I need you to take over because I've got to remove myself from the situation. I'll come back in a few minutes. So that's how we do it in our home. So
I have also had some bath time triggers. So I'll speak on the shower trigger with myself, with the caveat that I have a double standard with my daughter and my son. When my daughter touches me, I am more triggered than when my son does. So, and on top of it, she's a huge jokester. Everything is a joke. If you say no, she wants to keep pushing that boundary. With everything. So then when it comes to the sexual things, it's really a test of my patience and my maturity and how much I've healed. And so one time I was triggered was in the shower, and she's like rubbing her butt against my lower legs, and she's like going like, ooh, and I'm like, do not do that. Like, stop it right now. And then that means, oh, this is funny. And she still keeps doing it. And I'm dying inside. And inside, I want to just fling her across the shower. Like literally stop touching me. like she's the enemy inside. And it was horrible. And so, yeah, anytime she's touching me for too long, especially if some of her body parts touch me, like even if it's my left arm, like I'm into her, but it just sets me off for like days. I'm on edge. So yeah, my son, he stopped breastfeeding a few months ago, but even if he's touching my breast, it doesn't bother me. But if she does it, it's a whole nother story. And I did have a trigger also with the two of them showering together. She was, I don't know how graphic I can get to, but she was playing with his butt with her fingers. And I lost it. I wanted to beat her, but I didn't. But I grabbed her out of the shower and I let her stand in the corner, cold and naked, and she's crying. And yes, I did the shame, and I called her dad, and I'm like, you won't believe what happened. And I'm consoling Sandro, and I'm just like, is he traumatized? Is this sexual abuse? Is he gonna be okay? Is he gonna remember this? And I'm just like, oh my God, is this it? I'm like, what made her do this? I'm just like, I don't know. And I'm just, it was horrible. And I'm just like, you talk to her. And I'm like, if you do that again, I'm throwing you in the trash. I'm like, that sounds like a good scare. And I'm like, I don't know what else to say. How am I going to make sure she doesn't do this again? And she's like, are you really going to throw me in the trash? I'm like, yeah, if you do that, I will. And needless to say, some months later, she did it again anyway. So the threats didn't work, the scares didn't work. I don't know what works. So yeah, being triggered is a constant thing. I'm gonna continue to try different things and see what works. Listening to Rosalia made me think about whether we should tell them that we were sexually abused or not, so that they kind of understand. Because I've never considered telling my daughter that I was sexually abused. I haven't really told her what sex is, and I'm just like, maybe we need to explain so they don't just think we're crazy and paranoid. I don't know. I've told them, but I'm gonna really think about that now after doing this panel talk.
This is really good question, because now I'm looking back, way back when, soon after my abuse happened, I feel like I have to give my kids the speed lesson. I feel like I got to give them, if there's 100 ways to save myself, how am I not gonna, get into the situation? I want them to know it. I want them to know all 100 of them right away, and not even thinking that I'm going to overwhelm them, but because I'm myself overwhelming with how I want to quickly heal, until I realize everyone heal on their own time at their own pace. Therefore, I need to think about my children. They're gonna need to learn. They need going to understand how they understand in their own term, not how I want it to be. So I think that is how I learned to be mindful.
For me, it was I realized that I needed to really dive into my own healing because I kept stopping. Like I wanted to educate myself on abuse prevention. And so I would start learning about it. And then even just learning about it would be triggering because I was afraid of like having to have certain conversations, or how would I deal with certain topics that were just inherently uncomfortable for me. And so I would learn, and then I would try to implement, and then it would trigger and I would stop, and I would think, okay, that's enough, or I'll just like overprotect. I won't let them do certain things. And then my child would be like, can I go do this thing? And I would feel really guilty about the fact that I wasn't giving them the ability to flourish in so many ways because I was just like overprotecting, and that would trigger anxiety because I was like, oh my God, I'm doing what my mom did. And then I would like force myself to start doing more, education. And, it's just this like cycle that I would start to get into, and like I would stop and start. And eventually I just realized like I have to do something to figure out how to do this education, because I had to learn how to be uncomfortable so that my children would not have to be uncomfortable, eventually. And so that was when I decided I have to find somebody to help me. And then I dedicated myself to that healing process, which there were a lot of, I thought it was going to be somewhat easy because I went to school for psychology. I didn't finish my degree in that because I ended up going in a different direction. But I've always been very pro therapy. And so I was like, oh, this is going to be good. Like, I'm going to do the work. And a lot of it was really hard because stuff that I didn't expect to come up would come up. And I was really fortunate also that I had support. So like all these things that I learned are things that I now help other parents with. But I realized that that healing piece was so necessary for me to continue doing that work. And, I just recently started listening to this other educator who basically said what I've come to realize is what I've done is like I had to get uncomfortable so my kids wouldn't be in the position where they had to be uncomfortable. And I was willing to like step into that fire, but I was able to tap into my power through that process. So I think it's so important that we do sometimes sometimes we have to become strong enough to even step into a healing journey. And that was one thing that I came to realize, like my sister, who's also a survivor and has much more complex trauma than I do, has needed to build her resiliency before even stepping into a healing journey, because it requires so much. And so, for me, I didn't have the same trauma that she did. So I was able to just step into that because I have a support system as well. But for her, she's needed to really like gain the strength to even be able to get therapy or to seek out support. So there's different journeys for everyone, and everyone can step into their own healing journey in different ways. But for me, it was like I had to dedicate myself to doing that and finding the way to do that so that I could educate my kids and really take back my power.
For me, it's put my healing in the forefront. Like, I know I need help, so let me look for resources. I know some are going to be things I have to pay for, but I'm sure that there are going to be things that I can do and learn from that are free. So for me, I found an amazing therapist. I have had many therapists over the years, group therapy, individual therapy, all kinds of things. But I finally been able to find a therapist who is really helping me with that. Another thing that I have been able to do is seek out courses like with consent parenting. There's even a podcast. I'm out there taking notes. I'm trying to also practice what I'm learning, not just it going into my mind, but physically being able to follow through with these things. And they've really helped me. Now, with my first baby, I didn't really know exactly what I was doing because, who does? But I was sure I needed to breastfeed, because there was just this part in me that I thought, I don't like to be touched. No, this is not, no. But I think if I can breastfeed, maybe I can learn to love her, and maybe I can learn to be comfortable with her being around. And me being able to breastfeed really helped with my healing journey because it allowed me to just let somebody love on me and me feeling okay. Another thing I did was I started a blog about surviving and thriving as a parent who's a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And I had to stop for a while. Then I started back because sometimes it's just too triggering. But also, I felt like it would have been so helpful for me to have a community where there are people who are okay with saying, this is what happened to me. This is how it's affected me. What do I do? This is how I feel. My friends don't understand. My parents, because there's a lot of misunderstanding and I think lack of community around this. That's why these panels are like so cool for me. And so that's something that I wanted to do. And for my second child, it's so kind of different. Like there's this, I don't just feed her and put her down or change her and let her sit in her chair. I'll hold her, I'll play with her fingers and her toes, and it's just so different. And I'm like, oh my God, is this what everyone's been talking about? Oh, this is amazing. So yeah, putting my healing at the forefront has allowed me to kind of enjoy this part of my life when I thought that it was a death sentence, really.
For me, it has given me a reason to continue with healing, because anytime it would get hard or something would come up, I would just be like, all right, I'm done. I'm good. Or if I would feel, I got it, I'm good, I would stop. Here now as a parent, constantly every day there's a trigger, there's a reminder. Something reminds me of something that I need to work on. So it's constant reminders of what I need to do to work on. So, and I just want to be a good mom. I can't be the mom and the role model that I want to be for him if I'm not being that role model myself. I have to be the example. So here we go. Yeah, so it's a great reminder every day.
So parenting after abuse has affected me by making me have to face things I would rather suppress. I wouldn't even be on a healing journey if it wasn't for my children. I would probably still be out in the streets being promiscuous. If I didn't have children, I wouldn't be trying so hard to be a good mother. I always say my children are like my personal angels because they help me so much, them and my husband, but they make me have to look inside when I have to face the fact of why am I acting this way? Why am I addressing things this way? And then I have no option but to go within. My journey has been so different in every stage. I've evolved. I've ended up helping others, even being on this panel. When I told my husband I'm doing it this morning, I'm like, I don't know why I'm going to be triggered for days, but I'm like, I'm helping the people. So I'm doing it anyway. I'm just used to being triggered. It is what it is. I'll self-soothe. So it's a daily battle, but children definitely make me think about my abuse more. They've made me realize I was abused. It's good and it's bad, but it's a blessing because I'm healing.
My name is Boom and I'm a survivor.
Hi, I'm Rosalia and I'm a survivor.
Hi, I'm Zinette and I'm a survivor.
I'm Anji and I'm a survivor.
Hi, I'm Shanique and I'm a survivor.